Hi, everyone. This is Shari Steinbach, and I'm a registered dietitian working with the Michigan Bean Commission. And I'm joined today by Steve Savell, who is the Director of External Affairs and Sustainability for Bush Brothers and Company. Welcome, Steve.
Well, hi, Sherry, and thank you so very much. It's good to see you this morning.
Great. It's good to see you too. And Michigan Beans is a supplier of beans to Bush Brothers and Company. And we love that relationship. But as you know, the topic of sustainability has become important to both of us.
Mhm.
Consumers are asking about it like never before. And as a dietitian, what I'm finding is they're defining healthy foods, not only in terms of the nutrients they provide, but also sustainability. Are those foods I'm choosing produced and grown in a sustainable manner? And, are they part of a sustainable diet? So, they're really seeking those foods that are good for, I always say, people and the planet. So I want to delve into that a little bit because I think, beans are such a great thing to have on the table, especially when we're talking about sustainability. But Steve, if you could describe your role at Bush Brothers and Company and talk a little bit about how you define sustainability and, the importance of it to your company.
Sure. Yeah, well, and Sherry, thank you again for allowing me to, catch up with you this morning and speak to folks on this. So, as far as my role, external affairs and sustainability, that's kind of the area of the business that I represent. I've got almost a 30-year background with Bush Brothers. In the last couple of years, I've transitioned into this particular role, and sustainability has really, although it's been kind of part of what we do, kind of ingrained in our own behavior, to the point that you mentioned that consumers and customers. So if I think of a Kroger and a Walmart and Albertsons and all those, they too are asking questions. So there are our customers, and they really are wanting to know more about what we're doing. And so although we have been practicing what we believe are good sustainable business practices, they want to know a little bit more about that. And given that Bush Brothers is a privately held, is still a family owned business for about 114 years now.
Oh, wow.
That puts us in kind of a place where we're used to talking about our products. We're just not used to talking about ourselves. And so now we have to be able to provide some information. In some cases, we have to provide data, back to the folks that are wanting to know about sustainability. The beauty is we're already doing a lot of those things, so it's not a big change. And the product that we really lean heavily in on as the Beautiful Bean Company is already kind of inherently good both for people and the planet. And it's funny that you use that term. We did not coordinate that ahead of time because that's typically how we think about it. And we do. We say, well, what's good for individuals and the folks as well as the planet itself. So you asked the question, what does sustainability mean? In a lot of cases, it really gets down to responsibility. It's responsibility to ourselves, to our individual families and the communities that we live and operate and work around. Obviously, it's the natural resources, taking care of those. Our headquarters are in East Tennessee, and our facility is literally in the Smoky Mountains. And so we don't take that for granted. We've got facilities that are in Western Wisconsin. And so those are some beautiful farmlands that exist up there. And so we recognize that we live and operate amongst these areas. So we too have to make sure that things are sustainable. So it's in some cases, it's just as simple as saying, we need to make sure it is better than what it was when we first encountered it. Our responsibility is to hand it to the next group of either coworkers or our children or whomever that might be, so that it is better than what it was when we found it. So that's kind of where we think about that.
Yeah, it sounds like Bush Brothers has been doing a lot of things all along. And now really, you're probably just, focusing on it and really talking about it more, like you say, and sharing it, because you're right. When you think of customers, we think of all of those retail stores, those grocery stores who are selling your products, and we think about then the consumers. And you're right, they're all asking about it, and they're all wanting to know more. So I think that's great. Um, you know, Steve, as I've been working with Michigan beans, I've been learning a lot more about the unique properties of beans, how they grow, what they do for the soil. And they really are pretty special, I think, not only from a nutrition side, but also just what they are able to do for the land that they grow in. And so they have some unique properties, like I said. Can you talk a little bit about that from the nutrition and agricultural side?
Yeah, and I'll keep that not for anybody else's sake, but for my own sake. I'll keep that at a somewhat higher level as I begin to understand the kind of the biology, of the
Mhm.
bean. But the bean itself is pretty incredible, and a lot of times in our industry, we'll talk about the nitrogen fixation, component of all that, and
Yes,
sometimes that
yes.
feels like, well, what does that really mean? And in at least in simplest terms for me is the fact that unlike a lot of other ag commodities and crops that require nitrogen to grow, the
Mhm.
bean itself is actually, and this is pulses in general, they're actually creating their own nitrogen. They're pulling material from from the air and actually using and creating nitrogen, and then they're leaving nitrogen behind. The really cool thing about beans in a rotational crop is that the crop that follows a bean harvest does not require as much nitrogen for what it needs to grow because the bean has already left some in the ground.
Yeah. Does
And
that
so
mean
therefore,
less fertilizers? Like
that's
fertilizers, doesn't it?
absolutely, that is it helps from that nutrient management, a term that that I'll learn, but yet it is about the fertilizer, and so the fact is you do not require as much with that. The bean itself is also from a water standpoint. It's also it doesn't need a lot of water specifically, and the water that it usually uses is also kind of closer to the surface, so it's not tapping into to those water tables well below the surface. And again, beans kind of exhibit a good water behavior, and if you think about where they're grown across the planet, I mean they're grown almost everywhere and have been for thousands of years, but they often they can grow in very arid climates. They just adapt really well to where they are.
So
So,
kind of
and
drought resistant almost, a little
there
bit
is a
drought
whole
resistant.
lot of that. From a harvesting standpoint, they're harvested in a dry state. So that allows the farmers, as they're running equipment across the line, they're not having to go down into the soil. They're able to, leave a kind of the carbon that gets sequestered into the ground is able to stay there. So it's in a sense you're using less diesel potentially
Oh,
as a farmer to harvest. So you get a little bit of that kind of fuel efficiencies that are gained just because of, again, and for companies like ourselves, their beans are harvested dry, so they can be stored dry, so they can be put in a silo, and then we can can them later. We don't have to can them immediately like maybe some other fresh vegetables would require. So it gives us a little bit of a time to build up inventories, both from a raw material as well as the material that we're using to put into the can. So yeah, it's got kind of these great characteristics.
some really great characteristics. And as a dietitian too, I think about sustainable nutrition. And that to me is being able to have a diet that's affordable for all, right?
Mhm.
Accessible for all. And if you think about beans, like we said, what an affordable source of protein, fiber, many nutrients that they provide. Just incredible, really, what that cost per serving and the nutrients they provide. And especially right now, with costs the way they are, I find that people are looking, when they're going to spend their money, they want to buy the most nutrition for their dollar, right?
Mhm.
And they're not willing to give up healthy eating. So beans have just become such a great choice. They're so nourishing. And the other thing you mentioned, Steve, which I think is important, is dry beans, of course, but beans in the can, they have a long shelf life. And I see, and when I think of sustainability too, and what individual consumers can do, I think about wasting less, which
Yes.
is important. And, whether it's a dry bean and it's on the shelf for a long time, or canned beans, which I love to do, as I call it, I stock my pantry. Um, you know, you just have, there's such easy meal starters. And typically too, when you open a can and you use it in salads or a Mexican dish, I often will combine beans with lean beef or poultry, to kind of stretch out that meat and add some of those great nutrients, combine those nutrients together in many dishes. And you just don't have the waste. And I think that's another important part of this.
That, I'm glad you called that out, because there's another, when we think about kind of responsibility is one of our core values. Food waste is really right at the very top of all of that. And the product that we put in a can, and the cans in general, do help, minimize the food waste. And the versatility that you're describing on how you can
Mhm.
serve it, and certainly from a value standpoint,
Yes.
all of those are kind of woven into that. And the thing we also like to remind people, you didn't necessarily call it up, but we do think about the recyclability of the
Oh,
can. It
absolutely.
is by far
Mhm.
the most highly recycled kind of packaging material, at all. And the beauty of steel is the fact that it can be recycled infinitely, and it never loses, kind of the qualities and the characteristics of what steel, does. Unlike some other materials, when they get recycled, they begin to degrade over time. Steel doesn't. So, and it's recyclable everywhere. I mean, in some cases, most
Yes.
every community's
Mhm.
recycling, systems are able to handle steel. And so, the steel can that we're using today might have been the steel can that we sold, a year ago. It's just coming back to us, reformed, and we're ready to send it back out, with more, good bean products.
And I'm so glad you brought up the can issue because I often get asked that. And again, shoppers are looking at packaging now, and I see manufacturers reducing packaging, looking at what their packaging is. Is it recyclable? And certainly the can not only serves its purpose to keep that food very safe and the quality contained, but then the fact that you can, recycle it just always makes me happy to do that.
Mm.
So, yeah, very good. Um, Steve, is there anything else you want to share with our viewers? Like as Bush's moves into the future and you're thinking about your commitment to sustainability, anything new on the horizon, or just really continuing that the great, sustainability efforts that you have in place?
Yeah. Well, I guess the one place, giving we're kind of really, in a sense, thinking about the Michigan, crowd today. I think it's important to call out. The USDA has asked organizations across the country to think about, how to look at crops from what they're calling, in their term, kind of climate smart. And so that's the terminology that the USDA is using. And it's a very broad term, but it is essence, it's really trying to help the agricultural industry, which Bush Brothers considers itself part of. How do we think about, crops from the seed, through the growing, through the harvesting, through the distribution and processing, kind of that whole cycle of what goes on with agricultural products. And so there, we just a group of five big commodities there in Michigan, including dry beans, have come together to say, hey, we want to work as as row crops in the state of Michigan to understand and learn what does it take to actually be really efficient and effective, and how do we measure, and how do we track, and how do we get better, because some of these practices are well adapted and adopted by the farming community. Some of them may be a little questionable in people's minds, and so there's an opportunity now, and we're actually partnering up. The five crops are actually partnering up with the Nature Conservancy to work together to build out this program. We just submitted our proposal a couple of weeks ago, and we'll know more as the summer goes on whether we'll be awarded that. But what it did is it actually brought these groups together that, although they work together, I don't know that they always have a common project or a North Star that they're
Right.
working
Yeah.
on collectively. And I'm really proud that, say that, Bush Brothers is getting to be part of that group. We don't always, get that closely connected, into the into even into the bean community, even though we're tightly there, but we're not connecting in with the other, the wheat and the sugar beets and the corn and soy. So it's fun to see how that community there in Michigan really work together. And then, how can we learn and get smarter and contribute into that effort. So we're really excited about that
Oh, I'm
opportunity.
excited about that as well. Thank you for sharing that. It's just, I mean, I'm a firm believer in so much can be accomplished when you work together and partner and have common goals. So that's so exciting. You know, Steve, as we wrap up here, I know for people who are looking to eat a more sustainable diet, again, I think back to the dietary guidelines. And one of the recommendations that I often give is just to consume more fruits and vegetables overall. And when I say that, I say all forms, right? Yes, there's
Uh-huh.
fresh, there's frozen, there's dried, there's 100% juice products, but of course, canned is part of that picture. Again, the affordability, the versatility, the nourishment they provide. So, you know, of course, beans, we got to get those in our carts, our grocery carts, our refrigerator, our pantry, and in our meals. This time of year, personally, I'm thinking about all the delicious ways that I can add canned beans easily to my salads. It's getting warmer out, and there's so many ways to use them, or simple Mexican dishes that are family friendly. And so I do want to encourage our viewers too. They can go to Bush Brothers, BUSHBROS.com. There's some recipes and information there.
And
Canned
actually,
beans.
Shari, I'm sorry
Yes,
before it's
go ahead.
it actually is
Oh,
bushbeans.com. We've made it even simpler. So it's
you know what? I'm
bushbeans.com.
looking at it and I'm saying the wrong thing. Thank you. It's bushbeans.com. Thank you,
You
Steve.
bet.
Yeah. And cannedbeans.org. I got that one right?
There you go.
Cannedbeans.org. And I've used a lot of recipes from that website in some of the work that I do with Michigan beans. And then Michigan Bean, not an S on the end of that one, michiganbean.com. We've also got some great tips for sustainable eating and some wonderful recipes for year-round season, you know, for every season really. So
Yep.
again, Steve, thank you so much for being with me today. This has been so informative. I've learned a lot, and I know our viewers have too.
Oh,
Everybody
you
have
bet.
a great day.
Thank you, Shari. Thank you, everyone.